If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. And now, on with the story. The fine May rain fell on the windows of the mansion on the Upper East Side in New York City, while Benedict Caldwell watched from his office window as the city seemed to follow its normal rhythm. Cars cut through the avenue, people hurried under colorful umbrellas. Life was happening out there with a naturalness he could no longer comprehend. Inside that immense house, however, time had stopped 15 days ago, frozen at the moment his son Gabriel locked himself in his third-floor room and simply stopped living. Benedict was a man accustomed to solving problems. At 52, he had built an empire in the tech sector, overcome economic crises, faced powerful competitors, and always emerged victorious. His decisions moved millions, his words carried weight on corporate boards, his name opened doors that remained closed to others. But none of that mattered now. Nothing he had achieved over 3 decades served to reach the son who was wasting away upstairs. Locked in a silence so profound, it seemed to suck all the light out of the house. Gabriel was 23, a graduate in architecture, talented, sensitive, full of plans. Benedict remembered his son sketching designs on the living room table, his eyes shining as he explained every detail, every curve, every intention behind his creations. That vibrant young man was now just a motionless shadow, lying in a dark room, refusing food, refusing words, refusing his own existence. In the first few days, Benedict acted as he always did when faced with an obstacle. He called in the best professionals. Renowned doctors came from different states, carrying diplomas and years of experience. Psychiatrists, psychologists, nutritionists, holistic therapists. They all climbed those stairs with the confidence of people who had seen difficult cases before. They all came down defeated, with compassionate gazes and empty diagnoses. Gabriel simply wouldn't respond. Not to medication, not to therapies, not to emotional appeals. He had retreated to a place where no one could reach him. Benedict felt himself crumbling inside. For the first time in his life, his money couldn't buy a solution. His influence couldn't open paths. His contacts brought no answers. And with each passing day, as Gabriel refused even water, despair grew like a suffocating wave. He barely slept, spending hours sitting in the third-floor hallway, leaning against the wall next to his son's locked door, just listening to the silence that came from within. Sometimes he would cry there, alone, while the entire house pretended not to notice the tragedy unfolding. The mansion had 17 rooms, 6 bathrooms, a heated pool, and a garden that looked like it was out of a magazine. But to Benedict, it had all become a luxurious prison where he watched his sons suffering, helpless. Business meetings had been cancelled, social engagements abandoned. He could no longer pretend to be normal when his life was falling apart. It was on a cloudy Monday morning that Marlene arrived. Benedict barely noticed her at first. The house manager, Sylvia, a 45-year-old woman who commanded the staff with a firm hand and a watchful eye, had mentioned she had hired someone new to help in the kitchen and with cleaning. Benedict just nodded, distracted, with no energy to care about domestic details. Marlene Fisher was 41 years old and came from a small town in rural Kentucky called Hope's Creek. Her face was marked by the sun and by hardship, her hands calloused from so much work, and her brown eyes carried an old sadness but also a resilient sweetness. She wore her hair in a simple bun, dressed in a navy blue uniform Sylvia had provided, and carried only an old backpack with her few clothes and a framed photograph she never left behind. She needed that job. Her youngest daughter, Julia, 17, was finishing high school back home and dreamed of studying nursing. Her husband, Oswald, worked in a mechanic's shop, but his salary barely covered the basic bills. When Marlene saw the ad for a job in New York City with a salary 3 times what she could earn in her hometown, she didn't hesitate. She left her family temporarily, promised to send money every month, and boarded a bus that traveled all night to the Port Authority bus terminal. On her first day, Marlene was received by Sylvia with clear instructions and a serious tone. The manager was an elegant woman, always well-dressed, with an air of absolute control over everything that happened in the house. Her blonde hair was impeccably styled, her nails manicured, her posture erect, She led Marlene through the main rooms, explaining routines, schedules, and expectations. But it was at the end of the tour that Sylvia paused, looked around as if checking if they were alone, and whispered in a voice heavy with tension. "There is a delicate situation in this house. Mr. Caldwell's son, Gabriel, is going through a very difficult time. He doesn't leave his room, he doesn't eat, he doesn't talk to anyone. Several professionals have tried to help, but nothing has worked so far. The house feels heavy. We are all walking on tiptoes, trying not to make noise, trying to respect his and his father's suffering. You'll notice the atmosphere. Here isn't like in other homes." Marlene listened in silence, absorbing every word. She knew that kind of pain. She knew it intimately. 7 years ago, she had lost her eldest son, Robert, at just 15. He had faced a profound sadness that she hadn't recognized in time, and one day he was simply gone, leaving a void that was never filled. For months, Marlene had also stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped living. It was her sister, Constance, who saved her, preparing a simple chicken broth every day, sitting by her side, putting the spoon in her hand, and saying, "Only, you are not alone." Now hearing about Gabriel, something stirred inside Marlene. A deep compassion, mixed with painful memories and also with a strange sense of purpose. She said nothing to Sylvia, just nodded and went on with her tasks. For the first few days, Marlene worked in silence. She cleaned the ground floor rooms, helped in the kitchen, organized pantries. She observed the house's routine, the other staff, the movements. There was Mrs. Irene, the head cook, a 60-year-old woman who prepared elaborate meals that no one ate. There was Mario, the driver, a middle-aged man who spent hours waiting in the car with nowhere to go. And there was an invisible tension that hung over everyone, as if the entire house were holding its breath. Marlene noticed Benedict circulating like a ghost. He would come down for coffee but wouldn't eat. He would go back up, lock himself in his office. Then he would go to the 3rd floor and stand in the hallway for hours. His clothes were wrinkled, his beard unshaven, his eyes swollen. A man who had everything and had nothing. One afternoon, Marlene was cleaning the dining room when she heard raised voices coming. From the office. It wasn't her intention to eavesdrop, but the door was ajar and the words came through clearly. It was Sylvia talking to Benedict. "Mr. Caldwell, I understand your anguish, but we need to think about alternatives. Gabriel needs more intensive medical care. Perhaps it's time to consider hospitalization, a hospital environment where professionals can monitor him 24 hours a day." Benedict responded in a hoarse, broken voice. "Hospitalize my son as if he were a problem to be solved. He's not a problem, Sylvia. He's suffering. And I'm not sending him away from me. Not now." "But, sir, he isn't eating. This is serious. We can't just wait for something to change. And you think I don't know that. You think I sleep at night. He's my son, my only son, and I don't know what to do." The silence that followed was heavy. Marlene moved away discreetly, her heart aching. She knew exactly what Benedict was feeling, that helplessness, that desperation of loving someone who seems to be slipping through your fingers. That night, Marlene had trouble sleeping. Her room was small in the back annex, simple but comfortable. She looked at the framed photo she always carried. Robert smiling in his school uniform, his eyes full of life. How many times had she wondered what she could have done differently? How many times had she replayed the signs she failed to see, the words she failed to say, the gestures she failed to offer? But she also remembered what had saved her. It wasn't medication. It wasn't expensive therapies. It was her sister's presence. It was the warm broth. It was someone sitting beside her and just being there, without judgment, without rushing, without trying to fix what seemed irreparable. What if Gabriel needed that? What if he just needed someone who knew that pain up close, someone who wouldn't try to cure, but just to accompany? In the following days, Marlene began to pay more attention. She would go up to the 2nd floor to clean, and sometimes, when no one was around, she would climb another flight of stairs and just stand there listening. The 3rd floor was silent, almost eerie. Gabriel's door remained closed. But Marlene would stay there for a few minutes, just breathing, mentally sending words of comfort to this young man she had never seen. One morning around 3 a.m., Marlene went down for a glass of water. and found Benedict sitting alone in the kitchen, his head in his hands. He didn't hear her arrive. He was crying softly, muffled sobs that echoed in the silence of the house. Marlene stopped at the door, unsure whether to retreat or stay. Benedict looked up and saw her. For a moment he seemed ashamed to be caught in that state of vulnerability. But then something in him gave way. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice failing. I don't know what to do anymore." Marlene entered the kitchen slowly and sat at the table, keeping a respectful distance. "You love your son," she said softly. "That's already a lot." Benedict ran a hand over his face. "But love isn't being enough. Nothing is being enough. He's fading away, and I can't reach him." Marlene was silent for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes we can't reach someone because we're trying with the wrong tools. Deep pain doesn't respond to quick fixes. It needs time, presence, someone who just stays by their side without demanding anything." Benedict looked at her attentively for the first time. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been where your son is," Marlene answered, her voice calm but filled with truth. "And someone stayed by my side until I could come back." The silence that followed was different, less heavy, more respectful. Benedict studied the face of this woman who had arrived just a few days ago, trying to see beyond the simple clothes and humble appearance. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a wisdom that didn't come from books. "Do you think you could—" Benedict hesitated, almost afraid to ask the question. "Do you think you could try talking to him? All the specialists have failed, but maybe someone who truly understands—" Marlene's heart sped up. She knew this was delicate territory. Sylvia would certainly not approve, and there were risks. But she also knew that sometimes the answers don't come from where we expect. "I can try," she said, "but I can't promise anything. I can only offer my presence." Benedict nodded, clinging to that small spark of hope, like a castaway grabbing a piece of wood in the middle of the ocean. The next day, after a breakfast that no one ate, Marlene climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. Her heart was pounding. She carried only a glass of fresh water and a clean towel. Nothing more. She wasn't going to try to convince, persuade, or fix. Just be there. The door was locked. Marlene knocked lightly, 3 gentle taps. "Gabriel, my name is Marlene. I work here in the house. I brought you some fresh water. I'll leave it out here for you, okay?" Absolute silence. She placed the glass on the floor next to the door and stood there for a few more seconds. "I won't insist. I just wanted you to know that someone is here in case you need anything, whatever it is." Marlene went down the stairs, her heart heavy. She didn't know if she had done the right thing, but at least she had tried. Hours later, when she went back up, the glass was empty. The empty glass was a small sign, almost insignificant to anyone else, but for Marlene it represented a sliver of light in a dark tunnel. Gabriel had drunk the water. He had opened the door, even if for just a few seconds, and taken the glass. It was a minimal gesture, but it was a gesture. And minimal gestures, Marlene knew well, could be the beginning of something bigger. For the next 3 days, she repeated the same routine. She would go up to the 3rd floor in the morning, knock gently on the door, and leave a glass of fresh water, sometimes with a few slices of lemon, other times with mint leaves she picked from the garden. She didn't wait for answers. She didn't force conversation. She just offered and retreated. And every time when she returned hours later, the glass was empty. Benedict watched everything with a mixture of hope and fear. He observed Marlene climbing the stairs with that serene calm, so different from the anxiety that consumed everyone else. The doctors had arrived full of certainties and left defeated. Marlene arrived with no promises, only presence, and something was beginning to shift. Sylvia, on the other hand, watched everything with growing discomfort. She had always been the one responsible for maintaining order in the house, and now she felt she was losing control of the situation. A newly hired employee with no training, no credentials, was doing what renowned professionals had failed to do. It bothered her deeply, though she couldn't explain exactly why. On Thursday of that week, Marlene made a decision. It was time to take the next step. She went down to the kitchen before dawn, while the house was still asleep, and began to prepare something special. Mrs. Irene, the cook, arrived around 6 in the morning and found Marlene already working at the stove. "What are you doing up at this hour, child?" Mrs. Irene asked, surprised. "I'm making a broth," Marlene replied, stirring the pot carefully. "A chicken broth with fresh vegetables, very simple, the way my sister used to make it when I needed it." Mrs. Irene came closer, observing the ingredients on the counter. Carrots, potatoes, parsnips, parsley, leeks, and a free-range chicken she had asked Mario to pick up from a special market. Everything chosen with attention, with intention. "Who is this broth for?" "For Gabriel." Mrs. Irene sighed. "I've tried making everything for that boy. Elaborate soups, creams, light dishes. He won't accept anything." Marlene continued to stir, the steam rising and bringing with it that comforting aroma that seemed to fill the entire kitchen. "Maybe it's not about what we offer, but how we offer it. This broth isn't just food. It's memory, it's care, it's a piece of who I am." The cook fell silent, touched by those words. There was something about Marlene that inspired trust, a rare authenticity in a world where everything seemed calculated. The broth took 3 hours to be ready. Marlene waited patiently, adjusting the seasoning, tasting, remembering. When it was finally perfect, she served a portion in a simple ceramic bowl, placed it on a tray with a spoon and a cloth napkin. She took a deep breath and climbed the stairs. Reaching the 3rd floor, she knocked on the door as she always did. "Gabriel, it's me, Marlene. I brought something different today. A broth that's usually good for the soul. You don't have to eat it if you don't want to, but I'll leave it here. At least smell it, okay?" She placed the tray on the floor, and for the first time didn't go down immediately. She stayed there, sitting in the hallway, leaning against the wall next to the door. "If you open the door and want to talk, I'm here. If you don't, that's okay too. I just don't want you to feel alone." 10 minutes passed. 15, 20. Marlene remained there in silence, just breathing, sending positive energy through that wooden door. And then she heard a sound, an almost imperceptible noise. The lock turning, the door opened just a crack, a few inches. Marlene didn't move, didn't turn her head abruptly. She just stayed where she was, waiting. A thin, pale hand appeared, took the tray, and pulled it inside. The door closed again. Marlene closed her eyes, feeling tears welling up. It was another step, small but real. She went down the stairs and went straight to find Benedict. She found him in his office, looking at papers without really seeing them. "Mr. Caldwell, I took some broth to Gabriel. He took it." Benedict looked up, an intense emotion crossing his face. "Did he eat it?" "I don't know yet, but he opened the door and took the tray. It's progress." Benedict stood up, ran his hands through his hair, clearly moved. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you for what you're doing." "You don't need to thank me. You just need to keep having hope." An hour later, when Marlene returned to the 3rd floor, the tray was outside the door. The bowl was empty, and there was a small note written in a shaky hand. "Thank you." Those 2 simple words meant the world. Marlene kept the note in her uniform pocket, as if it were a precious treasure. In the days that followed, a routine began to form. Every morning, Marlene would prepare the broth, always with slight variations. Sometimes she added ginger, other times a touch of turmeric. She would go up, leave it at the door, sit there for a few minutes, talking softly through the wood. She told stories of Hope's Creek, her hometown. She talked about the green hills, the river where she used to wash clothes with her neighbors, the county fairs where everyone danced in the town square. She talked about Julia, her daughter, who loved to study and dreamed of helping people. She talked about Oswald, her husband, who could fix any engine but couldn't even cook an egg. And slowly, Gabriel began to respond. At first, just with short notes, then with a few words through the door. Until, on a Friday afternoon, when Marlene went up as usual, the door opened completely. Gabriel stood there, leaning against the doorframe. It was the first time Marlene had seen him. He was thin, very thin, his skin pale, his eyes sunken and reddish. He wore a loose t-shirt and sweatpants. His hair was disheveled, his beard unshaven. But there was something in that face, a pained beauty, a fragility that broke your heart. "You can come in," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. Marlene entered slowly, respecting the space that was his. The room was in semi-darkness, curtains drawn, messy, clothes on the floor, crumpled papers, a smell of a place that had been closed up for a long time. But she didn't comment on any of it. She just sat in the chair he indicated near the bed. Gabriel sat on the edge of the bed, looking at his own hands. "I don't know why you keep coming here. I'm not your problem." "You're not a problem, Gabriel. You're someone who is suffering, and I know what that's like." He looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. "You don't know me. You don't know what I did, what I didn't do." Marlene remained calm. "I don't need to know everything to be here. But if you want to talk, I will listen. Without judging, without trying to fix, just listen." Gabriel seemed to ponder this. It had been so long since he had spoken to anyone, so long keeping everything inside. And now someone was there, a stranger who treated his pain with respect, without trying to minimize or rush it. "She's gone," he said finally, his voice breaking. "The person I loved most in this world, and I couldn't stop it." Marlene nodded slowly. "Sometimes we can't stop things, because they are beyond our control. The pain we can't see is the most dangerous kind." Gabriel began to cry, silent tears streaming down his face. "I should have noticed. I should have done something. And now she's not here anymore, and I can't go on without her." Marlene got up and, without asking permission, sat next to him on the bed. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a light but firm touch. "I lost my son, Gabriel. He was 15, and for a long time I also thought I couldn't go on. I stopped eating, talking, living. But someone stayed by my side until I could breathe again. And I'm here to do the same for you." Gabriel turned to her, his eyes full of pain and a silent plea. "What if I don't deserve to go on? What if it's my fault?" Guilt is a weight we carry, even when we shouldn't. The pain someone feels inside is often invisible to those on the outside. You did what you could with what you knew. Now you need to learn to forgive yourself. They sat there, side by side, as Gabriel cried out years of repressed silence. Marlene didn't try to stop the tears, didn't fill the air with empty words of comfort. She just stayed there, solid, present, a safe harbor in the storm. When Gabriel finally calmed down, Marlene stood up and slowly opened the curtains. The afternoon light filled the room, soft and golden. Gabriel blinked, unaccustomed to the brightness. "Let's take it one step at a time," Marlene said. "Today you ate, you cried, and you talked. Tomorrow we can take another step. No rush." Gabriel nodded, exhausted but somehow lighter. "Thank you, Marlene. Really." She smiled for the first time since entering that room. "I'll go down now, but I'll be back later with dinner, okay? And I'll bring a clean towel. I think a shower might do you good." When Marlene went downstairs, she found Benedict waiting anxiously in the entrance hall. From his expression, it was clear he had heard everything through the open doors. His eyes were misty. "He spoke," Benedict said, his voice choked with emotion. "My son spoke." "Yes, he spoke, and he'll keep speaking, but it will take time, patience, and a lot of love." Benedict nodded, too emotional to form words. Marlene placed a hand on his arm in a comforting gesture and headed to the kitchen. She had a dinner to prepare. But not everything was calm. Sylvia had observed all this movement with critical eyes. She called Marlene at the end of the day, asking to speak privately in the administrative office. "Marlene, I need to make something clear," Sylvia began, her tone formal. "You were hired to work in the kitchen and with cleaning, not to act as a therapist or counselor. What you are doing with Gabriel could have consequences. If something goes wrong, the responsibility will be yours." Marlene faced her serenely. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Sylvia, but I'm not trying to be a therapist. I'm just being human. And Gabriel is responding." Sylvia crossed her arms. "For now. But what if he gets worse? What if he becomes attached to you and then you decide to leave? Have you thought about that?" "I have. And if that moment comes, we'll deal with it. But for now, he needs someone who understands him. And I do. There was a tension in the air, something unsaid hanging between the two women. Sylvia looked away, a muscle twitching in her jaw. Just be careful. This family has suffered enough. Marlene nodded and left the room, but she was left with the feeling that there was something more behind Sylvia's words, something personal, something that went beyond professional concern. That night, Marlene returned to Gabriel's room with a light dinner tray and a fluffy towel. He had taken a shower, changed his clothes, and opened all the curtains. The room was still messy, but there was a different atmosphere, less suffocating. Gabriel ate slowly, small bites, but he ate. And for the first time in 15 days, he managed to keep the food down without feeling nauseous. "Marlene, can I ask you a question?" he said, putting his fork down. "Of course." "How did you manage to go on, after losing your son? How did you find the strength to wake up every day?" Marlene took a deep breath, settling into the chair. "I didn't find the strength all at once. It was a long, painful process. There were days I only got out of bed because my youngest daughter needed me. There were days I only breathed because breathing was automatic. But slowly, I began to realize that honoring Robert's memory wasn't about dying with him. It was about living as best I could, carrying him with me, in a different way." Gabriel absorbed those words. "And do you still feel pain?" "Every day. But I've learned that pain and life can coexist. You never completely get over a loss like that. You learn to carry it in a way that doesn't destroy you." He nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I want to learn that. I want to be able to breathe without each breath feeling like broken glass cutting me inside." "You will. I promise you will. But right now, you need to rest. Tomorrow is a new day." Marlene left the room carrying the empty tray, her heart full of a cautious hope. It was just the beginning, she knew. The road ahead would be long, but the first step had been taken. And sometimes a single step is all we need to leave the darkness behind. The days began to take on a new shape in the Upper East Side mansion. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but rather a series of small daily miracles that accumulated like raindrops, filling an empty reservoir. Gabriel woke up earlier each morning, began eating larger portions, and gradually started to take an interest in the world around him again. Marlene remained his anchor. She went up to the 3rd floor 3 times a day, always bringing something made with care. Not just food, but also small gestures of attention. A flower picked from the garden. A book she found in the house library that she thought he might like. A song playing softly on her old phone, country songs from back home that spoke of overcoming hardship and new beginnings. Benedict watched it all with a mix of gratitude and amazement. He began to participate more actively, asking Marlene for advice on how to approach his son without frightening him. Slowly, father and son began to have short conversations, usually mediated by Marlene's calm presence. They didn't talk about what had happened, not yet, but they talked about the present, about the day, about small things that once seemed insignificant and now held the weight of preciousness. On a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after Marlene's arrival, Gabriel came downstairs for the first time. Benedict was in the living room reading the newspaper when he heard the slow, hesitant steps descending. He looked up and saw his son standing on the last step, thin but upright, present. "Hi, Dad," Gabriel said, his voice still weak but firm. Benedict felt tears well up but held them back. "Hi, son. It's good to see you down here." Gabriel took a few steps around the room, looking at everything as if seeing it for the first time. Light streamed through the large windows. The grand piano that no one had played in years stood there imposing. He approached it, ran his fingers over the keys without making a sound. "You used to play," Benedict remembered. "When you were a child, your mother loved to listen." The mention of his mother brought a heavy silence. Gabriel's mother, Helen, had passed away when he was only 12. An aggressive cancer that took less than a year from diagnosis to farewell. Benedict had raised his son alone since then, trying to be both father and mother, compensating for her absence with material resources when he didn't know how to offer emotional presence. "I remember," Gabriel said finally. but that was a long time ago. Marlene appeared at the living room door at that moment, carrying a tray with tea and homemade cookies. She had noticed the movement and had come to check. Seeing Gabriel, there she gave a discreet but genuine smile. "It's good to see you here, Gabriel. I made some chamomile and ginger tea. I thought you two might like some." She placed the tray on the coffee table and discreetly withdrew, but Gabriel called her. "Marlene, aren't you staying?" She hesitated, looking at Benedict, who nodded affirmatively. "Of course, if you'd like." The three of them sat, and for the first time in weeks, there was something resembling normalcy in that house. They drank tea, ate cookies, and talked about simple things. Gabriel asked Marlene about her family, about her hometown, about what life was like away from New York City. She told stories naturally, even making Benedict smile with her picturesque descriptions of her neighborhood in Hope's Creek. But not everything was rosy. Sylvia continued to observe the dynamic with growing unease. She saw the closeness between Marlene and Gabriel, saw how the young man looked for her with his eyes whenever he entered a room, saw how Benedict had started consulting this simple employee about decisions that were once exclusively hers. The feeling of being replaced grew like a poisonous weed. One Monday, Sylvia called a meeting with Benedict. "We need to talk about the situation with Marlene," she said, closing the office door. Benedict frowned. "What situation? She's doing an exceptional job. Gabriel is getting better thanks to her." "That's exactly the problem," Sylvia said, trying to keep her voice controlled. "She's not a mental health professional. She has no training. What she's doing could have legal consequences. If something goes wrong, the responsibility falls on us, on this house." Benedict leaned back in his chair. "Sylvia, I understand your concern, but for the first time in a month, my son is eating, talking, living. I'm not going to stop that. I'm not saying to stop it. I'm saying we need guarantees. We need her to sign a liability waiver, something that protects us in case there are any problems." Benedict sighed. "If you think it's necessary, talk to the lawyer and prepare the document. But I don't want Marlene to feel threatened or pressured." Sylvia nodded and left, but there was a cold determination in her eyes. She contacted the family lawyer, Dr. August Mendez, and requested the preparation of a formal document. 2 days later, she called Marlene in for a meeting. Marlene entered the office, to find Sylvia sitting behind the desk, with a paper and a pen in front of her. "Please sit," Sylvia said, her tone formal. Marlene sat, feeling the tension in the air. "Is something wrong?" Sylvia pushed the paper across the desk. "I've prepared a liability waiver. Basically, you are formally assuming the commitment to support Gabriel and taking full responsibility for the outcomes of that support. It's just legal protection for the family." Marlene took the paper and read it slowly. She wasn't a lawyer, but she understood enough to see that the document put her in a vulnerable position. If anything went wrong, she would be the only one to blame. But she looked beyond the words and saw what was at stake. Gabriel needed her, and she wasn't going to abandon him for fear of consequences. "I'll sign it," she said, taking the pen, "but not because of this paper. I'm signing it because I believe in Gabriel and in what we're building, and I trust that he will be okay." Sylvia watched as Marlene signed, feeling a strange mix of relief and guilt. She had gotten what she wanted, but she didn't feel victorious, just tired. In the following days, Gabriel continued to progress. He started going out into the garden, sitting in the sun, drawing again. His architecture sketchbooks, which had been forgotten in a drawer, were once again being looked through. He wasn't creating new projects yet, but he looked at his old ones with a mix of nostalgia and pain. One afternoon, while Marlene was watering the plants in the garden, Gabriel approached her. "Can I tell you about her?" he asked suddenly. Marlene stopped what she was doing and sat on a nearby bench. "Of course, whenever you're ready." Gabriel sat next, to her looking at the horizon. Her name was Laura. We met in college in our first year of architecture. She was incredible, smart, talented, full of life. We fell in love quickly, that intense kind of love that feels like it will last forever. Marlene listened in silence, giving him space to continue at his own pace. "But I didn't know she was suffering inside," Gabriel continued, his voice trembling. She was always so strong, you know, always cheerful, always helping everyone. I didn't see the signs. The nights she didn't sleep, the times she pulled away without explanation. I thought it was just stress from college, from life. And what happened? Gabriel took a deep breath, tears beginning to fall. She started to change in our last year. More distant. I tried to talk to her, but she always said everything was fine. And then one day, she was just gone. She decided she didn't want to be here anymore, and I couldn't stop it because I didn't know how much she was suffering. Marlene placed her hand on Gabriel's. You couldn't have known if she didn't let you see. People who are truly suffering often become experts at hiding their pain. It's not your fault. But I should have pushed harder. I should have noticed. Gabriel, I spent 7 years blaming myself for my son's passing. 7 years wondering what I could have done differently. But the truth is, some pain is invisible. And no matter how much we love someone, we can't save them from an internal battle we don't even know exists. Gabriel cried openly, and Marlene hugged him. They stayed there, in the garden, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. It was a moment of release, of starting to let go of the weight of guilt he carried. Marlene, how do you move on? Gabriel asked when he finally calmed down. I learned that honoring the memory of those we've lost isn't about destroying ourselves along with them. It's about living the best we can, carrying the love we feel in a way that strengthens us, not breaks us, and finding ways to turn the pain into something that helps other people. Gabriel wiped his tears, thoughtful. I'd like to do something like that. Something to honor Laura, something that makes sense. Marlene smiled. You'll find that path, in time. That night, Gabriel had an idea. He went to Marlene's room, knocking softly on the door. When she opened it, he was holding a notebook and a pen. I want to write a letter to Laura, he said. A real goodbye, something I was never able to say. Will you help me? Marlene led him to the kitchen, where she made some tea and sat with him at the table. Gabriel began to write, the words flowing between tears and pauses. He wrote about the love he felt, about the beautiful memories they had, built together, about the pain of not being able to help her, about the desire to move forward without forgetting. Marlene didn't interfere, just sat beside him, offering her presence. When he finished, Gabriel had 3 pages full of raw, true feelings. He read it aloud to Marlene, who cried with him. It was a beautiful, painful, but also liberating letter. What do I do with it now? Gabriel asked. Marlene thought for a moment. There's a ritual some people do. They burn the letter as a symbolic way of releasing what was trapped inside. To let it go, you... No? Gabriel nodded. I want to do that tomorrow in the garden. The next day at dusk, Gabriel, Marlene, and Benedict gathered in the garden. Gabriel had asked for his father's presence, and Benedict was visibly moved to be included in such an intimate moment. Gabriel placed the letter in a small metal tin, took a deep breath, and lit a match. Laura, he began, his voice choked. I loved you with everything I had, and I will always love you. But I need to learn to live without you here. I need to find a way to carry our love without it destroying me. This letter is my goodbye, but it's also my promise to move forward, to honor your memory by living the best I can. He lit the letter, and the 3 of them stood in silence as the flames consumed the paper, turning words into ashes that the wind carried away. Gabriel cried, but they were different tears. Tears of release. Benedict hugged his son for the first time in months, a long, tight hug filled with everything they couldn't say with words. Marlene stepped back discreetly, giving them space for their moment, but Gabriel called her over. Marlene, come here. You're part of this. She approached, and the 3 of them embraced there, in the garden, as night fell over New York City. It was a new beginning, still fragile, but real. The months that followed were a time of quiet reconstruction. Gabriel didn't go back to being who he was before. That would have been impossible, but he became someone new, someone who carried his pain with more wisdom, who understood that living didn't mean forgetting, but rather honoring through continuation. He began to use the entire house again, not just the 3rd floor. He started having breakfast with his father, their conversations still shy but increasingly frequent. He resumed his drawing, first with aimless sketches, then with more elaborate projects. There was a different intensity in his work now, a depth that came from someone who had touched rock bottom and returned transformed. Marlene remained a fundamental part of his recovery. She was no longer just the kitchen employee. She had become an essential presence, someone everyone sought out when they needed advice, comfort, or simply a sincere conversation. Benedict began to treat her with a respect that went far beyond the employer-employee relationship. There was gratitude, yes, but also a deep recognition that this woman had saved what was most precious to him. Sylvia, on the other hand, was undergoing her own transformation. Watching Gabriel's recovery stirred something deep within her. One afternoon she asked to speak with Marlene privately. They sat in the small administrative office, and for the first time, Sylvia seemed vulnerable. "I need to apologize to you," she began, looking at her hands. "I was hard on you. I created obstacles when I should have been supportive, and the truth is, I was jealous." Marlene was surprised. "Jealous?" Sylvia took a deep breath. "5 years ago I lost my sister. She was also suffering, also fighting invisible battles, and I couldn't help her. I tried, I found the best professionals. I did everything money could buy, but it wasn't enough. And then you arrived, with no training, no resources, and you managed to reach Gabriel where I had failed with my own sister. It destroyed me inside." Marlene reached out and touched Sylvia's arm. "You didn't fail. Every story is different. Every person carries their pain in a unique way. What worked for Gabriel might not have worked for your sister, and that doesn't diminish the love you had for her in any way." Sylvia let the tears fall, something she hadn't allowed herself in years. "I just wish I could have saved her." "We don't save anyone, Sylvia. We just walk alongside them. And sometimes the person finds the strength to save themselves, other times they don't. But that was never your burden to carry alone." It was a healing moment for Sylvia as well. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the pain without judgment, without guilt, just to feel. And Marlene was there, offering the same compassionate presence she had offered to Gabriel. From that day on, the dynamic in the house changed completely. Sylvia became Marlene's ally, working together to maintain a healthy and welcoming environment. The previous tension gave way to mutual respect and even a budding friendship. Gabriel, noticing the changes around him and feeling increasingly stronger, began to think about the future. One evening, during dinner with his father and Marlene, he shared an idea he had been cultivating. "Dad, Marlene, I was thinking about something. I want to create a space to help people who are going through what I went through. A place where they can find shelter, good food, someone to listen. Not a formal clinic, but a human place, you know?" Benedict put his fork down, interested. "How do you envision it?" Gabriel lit up, his eyes shining for the first time in a long while. "An emotional support center. No bureaucracy, no waiting lists. Just an open space where people can come when they're at rock bottom. With professionals, yes, but also with people who understand the pain from personal experience. And with food made with love, because sometimes a hot meal saves more than any medicine." Marlene smiled, moved. "That's beautiful, Gabriel." Benedict nodded, already mentally calculating resources. "I'll fund it, completely. We can start looking for a space, putting a team together. What do you need?" Gabriel looked at Marlene. "I need Marlene to be involved. She would be essential, not as an employee but as part of the coordination. Someone who brings that humanized vision to the project." Marlene felt tears welling up. It would be an honor. The following months were a period of intense planning. Benedict put his executive skills at the service of his son's dream. They found a large space in Greenwich Village, completely renovated it, creating welcoming environments, an industrial kitchen with the soul of a home, rooms for individual conversations and support groups. They hired psychologists, social workers, nutritionists, but they also made room for volunteers who brought life experience, who knew what it was to suffer and rise again. Marlene took over the coordination of the kitchen and also began to facilitate support groups. She brought to that space all the wisdom she had accumulated through her own pain, all the compassion that had sustained her and now sustained others. The center was named the Laura House. in honor of the memory of the young woman Gabriel had loved and lost. The opening took place on a sunny Saturday afternoon. There were flowers everywhere, a feeling of hope in the air. Friends, family, and future beneficiaries gathered. Gabriel gave an emotional speech, talking about his journey, about how he had found light in the darkness thanks to a humble woman who offered her presence when he needed it most. Marlene stood beside him, wearing a simple but beautiful dress that Benedict had given her. She didn't like being the center of attention, but Gabriel insisted she be recognized. At the end of his speech, he called her to the microphone. With a choked voice, Marlene spoke briefly. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just offered what I received when I needed it. A hot meal, a presence, a listening ear. And I learned that sometimes the simplest gestures carry the greatest power to transform. This space is not mine, not Gabriel's, not Mr. Caldwell's. It belongs to everyone who needs it, and we will always be here." The audience gave a standing ovation, many with tears in their eyes. Among those present was Julia, Marlene's daughter, who had traveled from Hope's Creek for the opening. She looked at her mother with immense pride, seeing for the first time the extent of the impact that this simple woman had made. Also present was someone Marlene didn't expect. Anne, the mother of Laura, the young woman who had passed. Gabriel had invited her, nervous but hopeful. Anne was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair, tired but kind eyes. She approached Gabriel after the ceremony. "Thank you for doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "For honoring my daughter in this way. She would be happy to know that even in her absence, you found a way to turn pain into help." Gabriel hugged Anne, and the two cried together, sharing a pain that no one else could fully understand. It was a healing moment for both of them. Anne then turned to Marlene. "And you, I've heard so much about you. Gabriel told me you were the one who brought him back. I have no words to thank you. You saved another mother's son, and that means the world to me." Marlene hugged Anne, and the two women, united by the experience of losing children, shared a moment of silent recognition. There was a sisterhood in pain that transcended words. In the months that followed, the Laura house flourished. Hundreds of people passed through its doors, each with their own story, their pain, their battle. And they found what Gabriel had found: presence, food made with love, a space to be heard without judgment. Marlene was there almost every day, cooking, talking, simply being. She kept in touch with her family in Kentucky, sent money, but she had also found a purpose that filled her in a way she never imagined. Gabriel slowly resumed his life. He went back to working on architecture projects, but now focused on spaces that promoted emotional well-being. His personal experience brought a unique sensitivity to his work, and he maintained a close bond with Marlene, visiting her regularly, considering her family. Benedict was also transformed. The man who once solved everything with money and power learned that the most important things in life cannot be bought. He grew closer to his son in a way he never had before, learning to be emotionally present, not just financially. And he developed a deep respect for Marlene, treating her as an integral part of the family. 2 years after the opening of the Laura house, Gabriel organized a photography exhibition in memory of Laura. He had gathered her favorite photos, moments captured over the years they had lived together. The exhibition was held in a gallery in Soho, open to the public, with all proceeds going to the Laura house. On opening night, it was packed. Anne was there, seeing her daughter celebrated with so much love and respect. Benedict was with Gabriel, proud of the man his son had become. Sylvia was present, now an integral part of that extended family. And Marlene wearing another beautiful dress, this time chosen by Julia, who had moved to New York to study nursing and volunteer at the Laura house. Anne approached Marlene during the exhibition. "You know, Marlene, I spent a long time being angry. Angry at Laura for leaving, angry at myself for not noticing, angry at the world for letting things like this happen. But seeing all this, seeing how Gabriel transformed his pain into something so beautiful, has helped me find peace. And a lot of that is thanks to you." Marlene held Anne's hand. "The pain never completely goes away, but we learn to live with it in a way that doesn't paralyze us. and finding purpose in pain is one of the greatest forms of healing there is. The two stood there side by side, looking at the photographs of Laura, a beautiful, smiling young woman, full of life in the images, and although she was no longer there physically, her memory lived on through the healing space she had inspired. The years passed. The Laura house expanded, opening more branches in other New York boroughs. Gabriel became a leading figure in architecture focused on emotional well-being. Benedict redirected a significant part of his business towards social causes. Sylvia found peace with her past and became one of the most dedicated coordinators at the Laura house. And Marlene continued to do what she did best, being present. She aged with dignity, her hair turning grey, the wrinkles marking a face that had seen so much pain, but also so much beauty. Julia graduated as a nurse and began working professionally at the Laura house, following in her mother's footsteps of caring for people. One quiet Sunday afternoon, years later, Marlene was sitting in the garden of the Laura house watching the activity. People arrived, were welcomed, ate, talked, cried, laughed. The cycle of healing happening daily. Gabriel approached and sat beside her. "Marlene, have you ever thought about writing your story? People need to know about you, about how simple gestures can transform lives." Marlene smiled, shaking her head. "My story isn't special, Gabriel. I just did what anyone should do. Be present when someone needs you." "That's exactly why it's special, because you show that you don't need a degree or money or anything other than a willing heart." Marlene looked at him, with affection. "You're okay, Gabriel, truly, and that's all that matters. I'm okay because you taught me it was possible. That pain can coexist with life. That honoring those we've lost isn't about dying with them, but about living the best we can." They sat there in a comfortable silence, watching the golden sunset over New York City. It was a moment of fullness, of completeness. Marlene lived to be 72. When she finally passed, she was surrounded by love. Julia was by her side, as was Oswald, who had moved to New York years earlier. Gabriel and Benedict were there. Sylvia was there. Anne was there. Dozens of people she had touched over the years filled the hospital, the hallway, wanting to be near. She passed in peace, knowing she had made a difference, that her pain had not been in vain, that Robert would live forever in every life she had helped save. The funeral was simple but beautiful, exactly as she would have wanted. And the Laura house remained stronger than ever, a living legacy of a woman who proved that the greatest revolution happens through everyday acts of love. Gabriel continued the work, now not only in memory of Laura, but also of Marlene. He taught the next generation that healing comes not just from technology or advanced medicine, but from presence, from food made with care, from someone sitting beside you and saying, "You are not alone." And so the story of Marlene, Gabriel, Benedict, Laura, and all who were touched by them became a silent but powerful testament that in the end, what saves us are not the grand solutions, but the small gestures, a warm broth, a presence, a heart willing to feel another's pain without trying to fix it, only to accompany it. And that, in the end, is the greatest form of love there is. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Marlene, Gabriel, and all who crossed their paths has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of pain, resilience, and love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest and truest side of the human soul. Stories that remind us that even in the darkest moments, there is always a light of hope. We'll see you in the next episode with another narrative that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on life. Until then.